Welcome to the Dad Lit Pod, the literary podcast for people who are concerned your morning showers are taking too long. Today I'm speaking with Tim McKay. Tim is a fantasy author, professional editor, and writing instructor. He recently published the first book in the Dreymare Chronicles, titled The Fall of Selvandria. It is available on Amazon, and links will be in the show notes. Thank you for joining me, Tim, on the Dadlet Pod.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And you always
You-
have the best intros.
I'm running out of them. So if anyone has any ideas, you feel free to send them in.
I'm going to start
So,
pinging Grok.
yes. So, Tim, I'm not going to do that. Don't get them mad. They'll get mad at me, and the AI people will come after me. Uh,
Yep.
don't touch AI. Get everyone pissed at me. But anyway,
Especially in the book community. Yep.
yeah, the book community be mad at me. Don't go on the Dadlit pod. He used AI to write one of his jokes at the beginning of it. That machine,
Sadly
he's
accurate.
he's letting that machine replace him. No, not
Yeah.
going to do that. I'm not doing that, literary community. I am a noble Philistine, just like all of you, scribbling on the cave wall. I refuse. I don't
Oh,
even
that's funny.
use I don't even use spell check. That's right.
Now that's Die Hard. There you go.
Yes, yes. I irritate my wife by not using spell check.
That's
But
funny.
anyway, so Tim, you are the first fantasy author we've had on the Dadlet pod.
Oh, wow. Well, now I feel
and
especially
and
privileged.
this is the first one. And fantasy has become, let's say, a little contentious as of late.
Oh, yeah.
Namely, that all the fantasy books that are being published are the ones my wife reads that are smut.
Of course. Yeah, there we go.
that are that are, as she describes them to me, very entertaining smut.
Hmm.
Which
Yeah.
I'm thrilled for because it's gotten her into reading, and I think that's terrific. But I'm told that there is not a lot of dad lit fantasy out there. But of course, we have the Fall of Selvandria. Would you consider the Fall of Selvandria dad lit? Well, tell me about the book. Tell me about the Dreymare Chronicles and the Fall of Selvandria.
Sure. And yeah, I can say up front by that implied dichotomy, I would consider it more on the dadlit side for sure.
Yes.
Um, Even when I wrote it, my goal from day one when I wrote The Fall of Sylvandria was, uh, I'll put it this way, the kind of fiction that I would have enjoyed when I was in my late teens. And funny enough, uh, at the time, I was, diving into things like Lord of the Rings, but also Wheel of Time, and a lot of these, more popular epic fantasy series. Um, and I was also heavily involved at church in churches at the time. And so, even
Hmm.
though that's kind of a chapter out of my past at where I am now, I when I wrote The Fall of Sylvandria years later, my idea was I wanted something that I could have enjoyed at that age, and my friends from that time, who I'm many of whom are still my friends now, that they'd be able to enjoy it. I wanted it to be something that uh, face faith-based communities, but also secular communities, could enjoy simply as good but clean, action-packed, intense fantasy, and that's I think what you get with The Fall of Sylvandria. It's dark but clean fantasy.
Okay. What is the give me the not the plot. What do we call it? The
Quick
log
little
line.
synopsis.
Yeah, give me the synopsis. The synopsis for because I started reading it,
Hmm.
but I'm not far enough into it where I could tell you. There's a great scene with a woman who definitely just slays and then
Yeah.
fights off some winged reptiles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun with that introduction.
Yes.
That's even just the prologue. Wait till you see chapter one, and you meet the main character there, and let's just say he gets thrown into the deep end very quickly. Um, so in a nutshell, it is flintlock fantasy. So it's set in a period with kind of I would say uh, 18th century level technology,
Hmm.
bleeding into Napoleonic era. And in a nutshell, you're looking at a fantasy world beset by an evil or parasitic organism. Just this dark malevolence that has spread throughout the world, and they're not quite at the level of being able to understand, let alone fight back. And only now are people starting to realize just how grave the threat is. And a lot of these characters are getting thrown into the deep end very quickly, and they have to fight their way out of the pit, so to speak. You'll see after reading chapter one by why that's kind of a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke about the story. But
Nice.
yeah, that's what I can tell you. I can tell you it's you've got a lot of ships and cannons, but also medieval swords and a lot of mystery that I like to throw in. A lot of magic, obviously, a lot of dragons, a lot of monsters. It's a lot
Yep.
of chaos, and that's by design.
That's terrific. And that does sound quite like Dadlit.
Yeah,
Dads tend to like chaos and action,
yeah,
and everyone likes dragons.
yeah.
So what is what underlying, right? So when you have sort of you've already gotten into the question of you wanted to create a fantasy that was accessible to people, a clean fantasy.
Hmm.
What other things inspired the Draymare Chronicles? What are you getting at with the similar to, for example, we talk a lot about the pastoralism of J.R. Tolkien
Mm,
and his kind of anti-industrial vision and that sort of thing, or C.S. Lewis's being what is technically known as a Christian apologist, although
mm,
it's sort of a weird way to describe it. It's a weird word for it. I've never quite understood that.
yeah.
So what would you say? What would you say are you're hitting upon?
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up really great examples because I love C.S. Lewis and I love Tolkien. And, something I've talked with a lot of other authors about, uh, I find especially modern fantasy, a lot of the stuff that's coming out lately, very preachy. And that is, I would use that word, almost jokingly, having been a pastor. It almost sounds funny for me to criticize books based on preachiness, but then I look at the really great fantasies of authors like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and with C.S. Lewis, that more overt allegory, and there were times where he was very overt but it never felt preachy in the Chronicles of Narnia. It was
Yeah.
the message came with it, but it wasn't, you weren't being beaten over the head, you know.
Yeah,
And
the
so
sort of morality was written into the characters and into the
yeah,
characters' actions. Yeah.
yeah. So you left the story having gleaned those, but it wasn't as if even if it was the point of the story per se, you didn't feel like the story was a side addition to the morals. You felt like the morals were just ingrained into this overarching story. So you got both entertainment and, growth. I like the word growth to describe it. So yeah, with the Fall of Sylvandria, um, there was a lot going on in my mind in terms of principles and themes I wanted to work in. Uh, you know, the struggle between agency and destiny was a big one in there. Um, Character in the face of struggle, maintaining character in the face of the unexpected, which is sometimes hard to capture in fantasy, but I had a lot of fun with it. Just what it's one thing to maintain yourself when your situations stay the same, or when you are used to struggles that you are facing. A trained soldier, for example, one of the characters in the book, dealing, with the traumas of his past, but nevertheless accustomed to the sort of struggles that he's facing in the context of this chaotic monster infested world, but someone who gets sidewinded by some dark malevolent force, and facing the horrors of the world that you don't expect. That's when your character really gets tested. And so I tried to weave that into the story as well. You know, Maybe finding yourself at the same time in the midst of the pit and climbing out, hopefully a better version of yourself and not worse, which
Yeah,
isn't
so
always a guarantee.
it's a quest.
Yeah. Oh,
on the
absolutely. It's
part of
very
everyone.
quest filled
It's
story.
quest filled.
Yeah.
And how many different characters, how many protagonists are we going to have the view from?
Lots. Yeah, I've always liked books with lots of POVs, which comes with challenges for sure.
Yep.
So it's funny enough, I don't think I've had any complaints on that front, you know. It was one where I expected a lot more pushback and I didn't really get, maybe I just told the right people about the book early on, but
Hmm.
um yeah, it was something I worried about, put a lot of thought and effort into getting now, the fun thing about multi POV is it lets you flesh out those characters. So I think that is something, if done well, people appreciate, is you get flesh out versions of more characters than if you just followed one or two. But it
Hmm.
can be a lot to keep track of, and that is something in my books. I've been told repeatedly, and somewhat by design, I don't handhold. So jumping between a lot of those characters can be hard after a while. There's just a lot going on in the world, and that's something I like in books. I like taking the time, and I like being able to reread something and discover new things. So,
Yep.
but you don't want your reader to be lost either. So that's been my challenge throughout, is how do I showcase my principle while writing. Some people who do multi POV, they will write, um, they'll write from whoever is feeling the events most intensely. I think that's how it's been described to me before. Not
Hmm.
exactly how I approached it. I approached it more, who has the best vantage to tell this story in a specific moment. So sometimes you're looking through the eyes of a bystander who's nevertheless very important to the story overall, but the main event might be just something they're watching and not yet participating in. It just depended on the scene itself and where the story was taking us. So
I think that's a really interesting concept that you bring up, which is how do you choose who's viewing the action
yeah.
at that time? Which I've never actually thought about, to be perfectly honest. Although I have read all the George R. R. Martin books, which are very sort of flushed out
Yeah.
using that underlying idea. Whatever I envision um, the moment or the element of the story and the character, I'm always inside the character. It just naturally occurs to me this character is doing this thing. It would be interesting. Why don't we follow them? Type of thing. That's sort of how I do it. But I think that's interesting that there can be a way where you choose a character based on agency or emotion, or simply because the story itself lends itself to having that character have that view. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I feel at this point I wrestle with that on an almost daily basis in my writing. And I love it. It's great, but it definitely guides a lot of my storytelling and decision making.
Yeah, so how much upfront work are you doing in terms of planning when you're writing what I imagine is three books,
Yeah,
or
well,
is a standard trilogy, or are we episodic at this point?
I think I'm tentatively taking an episodic approach, and I might take a break from it to start another series soon.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, which a lot of people say not to do, and I'm kind of already shrugging that advice off. I don't think it's very good.
Yeah,
It's just to
take
get through.
that.
Yeah,
Take that, people who don't like it.
yeah. So I mean, as it stands, the book, so the sequel, was meant to be it was I'll say this, it was almost going to be a duology the way I was writing this sequel, and I reached the point where I need to split it. So
Yeah.
so I right now I'm in the thick of pivoting, and I'll branch that into the question about outlining versus, and planning. But as it stands, it's going to be at least three books now that I am splitting it. um it probably four or five. I think that looks more realistic because there are things I want to flesh out beyond where the third book ends. If anything, that's just the beginning in some ways. This is meant to springboard the potential for more if people want it. I want to keep writing it.
Hmm.
As far as planning, I I'm in the middle for sure. So I can't write if I don't have some semblance of an outline.
Yeah.
but I will betray that outline the moment it's convenient. And I'm definitely a pantser in the moment. I'll let the story guide me. Um,
So you've world built is what you have. You have the Chronicles of Draymare world. What underlying elements make the Chronicles of Draymare world different?
mm.
And what are those elements? Why are they important? And what do they sort of say about your goals as a fantasy author?
Well, I think the most unique thing, and I get this, well, two world building elements that I think make it unique. A lot of people like that there is a strong sci-fi element to it.
Hmm.
So it is fantasy sci-fi, definitely more on the fantasy side, but there is a strong fantasy element that becomes prevalent about halfway through book one, and then from that point forward, you're still always going to have the stronger fantasy vibe, but you now know this underlying element. And on that,
Yeah,
the
so
Dre,
there's a science
yeah,
underlying the mystical elements of it. There's
exactly.
rules. Yeah.
Yeah, and the magic itself. I don't. I wasn't going. I wanted a felt magic, like some books I've read. Very scientific approach. You feel like you could map out and write an encyclopedia describing the magic. And then I've read
Hmm.
some where even without that full knowledge base, you read it and it feels like you're experiencing it for yourself. The
Hmm.
master of that, in my opinion, was Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, you felt the one power as you read the scenes where it is tapped into by the characters. So that was
Hmm.
kind of something I was very much going through with, or going for with the Draymare magic system. Um, and on that note, that's kind of the fun thing for these books. My guiding principle is that everything in one way or another comes back to the Draymare, which is the name for that organism. Uh, and because it starts as very microbial, almost like a bacteria, but connected, so it can form a hive and essentially a semi-intelligent cluster, and then those shape into worm-like organisms or kind of leeches, almost very vile. And those, as it grows in size and grows in intelligence, it can infect and parasitize humans, but it can also, when threatened, can manifest and start creating things like monsters.
Hmm.
So the all the manifestations of evil you see in this world, they all come back to this virus or bacteria like organism. So the dragons, they are essentially the defense system of this evil. And everything else, you've got phoenixes, you've got lizards, flesh-eating insects, sea serpents, raptors that you've seen in the prologue. Everything ties back to this malevolent force that is spreading through this world.
And so I did not know that you were a pastor.
Mm.
So that was your first job.
Yeah, that was straight out of high school. I went to Bible college and then went into ministry for well, essentially 2 years there. And so it wasn't a long career as a pastor, but
Do you
uh,
think that other than influencing your desire to make your fantasy accessible to people of faith, is any of that influenced sort of your vision? I mean, obviously C.S.
uh,
Lewis, for example, or other fantasy authors. Would you say that that's weighed on your decision making and influenced its way into your writing?
absolutely. Even just my life in general, all considered, that's a 13-year roughly chapter of my life when you factor in
Hmm.
when I first really got involved in the churches I was a part of, and then going to Bible college and then ministry. That doesn't just go away, nor would I
Hmm.
want it to. So many of my closest friendships, but also just how that shaped who I am and my own, morals, my own character. It's very much dependent on those communities, those principles, that faith. So yeah, so that obviously that absolutely bleeds into the story, in some ways quite literally, where It's very prevalent, and yet again, not trying to be preachy. So I was very careful about that, making it accessible, not for the sake of dialing anything down, but I wanted it to be, I wanted it to capture those experiences and those principles while at the same time doing for me what fantasy did earlier. Because before church, much younger, there were some dark years, not like I would say I have a lot of great memories from my childhood, but a lot of really, hard ones too. And
Hmm.
fantasy very early in those years was, uh, you know, I wouldn't even just say escape is the wrong word. I don't like the term escapism because that's not what I'm going for here. For
Yep.
me, even at a young age, it was taking the time to dive into those fantasies. It wasn't just escaping, it was almost a refusal to believe that the way things were at the time was how they had to be. It was me daring to believe things could be different and could be better. And so
This
that's
is
kind of what I go for in my, I would say and that is huge in my fantasy, is even in a world replete with chaos and evil, there is hope. And that is, so I wanted a sort of blend of escapism and hope. And I think that more than anything is what I'm going for with the Draymare Chronicle.
I think that's interesting because I'm going to say the not the third of three recent interviewers that's brought up elements of faith versus what so I interviewed a sci-fi author who studied Robert Heinlein,
Okay, yes, yeah.
and his name is J. Dan Sawyer, and he had previously written this terrific uh, blog post that I really loved, and that I keep coming back to, particularly as I talk to authors within the dad lit or the data sphere.
Mm,
And he talked about the question of, is literature empty in a state of secular stagnation? So this question of whether art can exist and be worthwhile if it doesn't exalt a greater idea. And I think it's interesting because Charlie Condick brought this up, J. Dan Sawyer brought this up, and to some extent, I think that's an operating idea that you yourself embrace with your writing. Would you say that's accurate?
very tough to say. I think you're hitting on something absolutely. I mean, we could go much deeper into questions of purpose, including in the lows of life, including in times where you have no faith and what keeps you going.
Yeah,
Um,
so to that extent, it's not nihilistic.
yeah,
The
absolutely.
the underlying element of is not necessarily not beyond. It goes beyond not just being nihilistic, but also
Yeah,
goes to sort of there is a purpose to
yeah.
what you're doing, and you want that purpose to be present, and that purpose is aligned not with sort of a postmodern vision
Mhm.
of kind of what, for example, George R. R. Martin suggests he
Yeah.
does, but which we all know he's not doing
Mhm. I think,
because
yeah,
he's
exactly. I know where
not.
you're going. Well, the
Yes, he
funny thing is, you're hitting it on the head because a
yes,
lot of, especially in, I'll call it the grimdark sphere, even though that's a very hard term to define.
yeah,
But there are a lot of authors who saw, G.R.R. Martin's success and they thought, oh, yeah, I'm going to do that. And so they came in with this kind of modern nihilism
yes,
and they just started writing the bleakest, most empty, most pointless literature, and just frankly grotesque too. And I like to say, with my fantasy, you will get intense action, intense but not grotesque.
yeah,
Partly in defiance of that, and but it's not just the violence I'm talking about. It's the twist. It's not the morality is generous. There's, if any, they're going for the exact opposite of morality. They're going
yeah.
for just absolutely broken, desperate, ruthless, terrible characters across the board. What they missed is that hint of purpose and principle and hope, because some even G.R.R. Martin, you have that, the what people really love is the prose, and hidden within that prose are those little nuggets of gold that keep you going amidst the darkness,
Yes.
you know. And a lot of these authors missed that for a while, so you had a lot of really just bleak, terrible, soul crushing emptiness for a while. And a lot of those same authors now, I don't want to get specific here, but I one of my most recent reads was a grimdark book, and it was one of the best I've read in a very one of the best books I've read in a very long time. And I was
Yeah.
shocked because it had totally jumped away from that caricature of grimdark, and it had, despite the grittiness and the intensity, it had extremely elegant and beautiful prose, and lots of those. It had that beacon that you're describing. It had that overarching, sun that it was being guided by, that north star that it was clearly following throughout. And I loved it. I drank it up. It was one of the best books I've read in ages. And
Yeah.
I normally I wouldn't have touched a book in that sphere for exactly this reason. So it was a very, very pleasant surprise.
So, what are within the contemporary vision of fantasy? You being a fantasy reader and writer, aside from obviously your book, which you've given us the an understanding of it. I think it's meant to be very accessible. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be intense, but not indecent.
Yeah.
And so, what are some other fantasy authors that you think hit upon the dad lit sphere of
Mm.
these sort of underlying elements that if you want to um, show it to your kid and be like, obviously, other than Tolkien, obviously,
Yeah.
other than the Wheel of Time, what are some contemporary dad lit fantasy authors that you think that say, I came and I say, I've got a 14-year-old daughter or son, and she's not ready for Sarah J. Maas.
Mm.
Let's wait till college for Sarah J. Maas.
Yeah.
This is already on the shelf. We'll wait. We'll wait a little bit. Who would you bring to the table?
Oh, it's so tough for modern ones. Um, yeah, no, sorry, let me put that aside. Yeah, for modern, I mean, I can be a little biased here, where one of my closest author friends right now, Isaac Anderson, who I co-host All Caps with on YouTube,
Yep.
he wrote essentially I would call it a darker but clean, again. I would put it right in this category of dad lit, and
Yeah.
child, like, well, teen appropriate for sure. He wrote A Song of Bones. Actually, that I do have here. Yeah. Here we go. Oh, I guess I can't. We're on audio, but
Yes.
yeah, I can show you anyway. A Song of Bones
Yes.
by Isaac Anderson, and it's very Redwall inspired but darker.
So
So
what is
so
what is Red Wall?
so Redwall, oh, I want to say 90s, maybe even earlier. It was a series uh, of books where the main character, fantasy books with the characters all being animals of some type, rats, some mice, rats, squirrels, I believe, badgers, some birds, and lots. It felt like epic fantasy, but all from the perspectives of animals.
So
And
kind of
and
like a Watership Down.
yes, yeah, 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 very
Yeah,
much.
okay.
And this was classic for a lot of younger fantasy readers for a whole generation. Very much grew up on. Uh, yeah, I would say I think Redwall came after, and very much for a while was the craze for anyone who enjoyed Watership Down for sure.
Hmm. So if you mentioned the possibility that Tim
Mm.
McKay is going to break from the Daymare Chronicles and write something else. Is it going to be in fantasy as well, or would you break into something else?
I've actually already written one and a half, so only one and a half, but still, the proof of concept is there. I've done some of the world building. I wrote one and a half chapters for a new book called Skyfall. I
Hmm.
mean, obviously, it's very early to even be dropping the title, but I have it on even on my social media bios at this point because my heart is set on it for sure. It's just a matter of when. Um, and it's following for now two points of view, and I almost want to challenge myself to just stick to the two to maybe give
Yep.
readers a break from the 14 or so that you get in.
Just from the party.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there,
this is just a stay at home.
yeah,
This is a stay at home with just a couple of friends
yeah,
versus
exactly.
the roaring party. Yeah.
And I don't, well, again, it depends on how far into the Fall of Selvandria you are, but uh one almost universally agreed upon favorite character from the book is Rinwen, and she's a 9-year-old, very scatterbrained, very chaotic character with lots of power and lots of hilarious things happening around her. And writing from that child's perspective was so much fun. I absolutely loved
Hmm.
getting into it, and including just in the prose itself, because I threw off all the rules and just had fun. And I think so it provides some comic relief, but as a writer it also created some creative freedom that I hadn't necessarily been allowing myself, maybe without realizing. And
Hmm.
a lot of people love their love her chapters. So I it kind of sparked the idea for this. It's not part of the Dreamer Chronicle, but it is very, very, very loosely connected. I can't say more than that, but the series will follow at for now just two uh, roughly 10-year-old children in this. The story starts in a setting of islands trapped from the main world below by this divide, a divide, a magical divide called the Skyfold. So they live above, and it's full of magic and again monsters. I can't get away from that, and but very fun. The point is, both of these characters are already very fun to write and very fun to follow. There's this bickering, boy and girl who've grown up together, and they uncover something that changes their world for forever. Um, and it's just very fun. I kind of pictured it as a mix of all my childhood shows combined with some fun fantasy. I even had a list at one point. I could probably open it, but everything from Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon and what else did I have in there? You know what? Let me find this for you really quick. I have it nice and quick accessible.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, here it is. Here's the list of inspirations going into this new series: Dragon Ball Z, Legend of Zelda, obviously, Pokemon. But then I'm also tying in some Prince of Persia, some Clash of the Titans, the How to Train Your Dragon. That should give you a hint of where it's going. So yeah, lots of monster and dragon lore mixed in with almost a progression fantasy kind of story. Very much start
Yeah.
from rock bottom and build up to a lot more. Yeah, so just a fun, very much far less dark than the Fall of Sylvandria, and far more a fun adventure from a child's perspective.
Yeah, well, that's fun.
Yeah.
So you are a writing instructor. I have never had a good writing instructor until I talked with Craig Turley Turleson, and he taught me about the importance of verbs.
Mm.
He taught me about the importance of verbs. Also, not to use adverbs. Don't use adverbs.
Classic Stephen King
And
advice.
yes, and make sure that verbs are very important.
Mm.
So you're a writing instructor. What are some thoughtful writing rules, Tim McKay's thoughtful writing rules that you would impart and the basis for them and things that you follow?
Well, there's a fun story there first, really quick, which is that uh, you know I haven't been teaching at the college too long. It's here in Ottawa, Algonquin College. Um, uh, I think for US, I would put it on par with trade school. Most of the programs are very, we have it has a business department, but a lot of the programs are very, computer science and uh, sub engineering. And but the writing program, I took it after my master's. So I did my schooling first in theology, but then I did history, and then I did public policy. And I went from that into this writing program, and it was the best schooling I have ever had. I absolutely loved this writing program. So when they asked me to come teach for them a few years later, that was just mind blowing to me. Sadly, it is looking very likely it is looking very likely that the program will close after next year. So it might be my last year teaching,
Oh,
at
well,
least
that's a
at
shame.
this school. Yeah. Um, all the colleges in Ontario and a lot of in Canada actually right now are facing closures like that. They chopped at 30, I think 37 programs at Algonquin College, or at least they're set to be chopped next year because of budget cuts. This is just really too bad. But
Yeah.
yeah, anyway,
Well, I'm
so
sorry to hear that, but you could impart some of these words of
well, that's my
wisdom
point.
onto
Is this
the.
is the last chance I
Yeah,
have
this
without
is
me,
this might be the last chance you have. Feel really
Yeah.
bad saying that, but
I did. I mean, the nice thing I do that at part time, and I edit part time.
oh,
That's kind of my
okay.
life right now on top of writing. So, which is nice. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, would I this quickly to fall into a place where I get to do what I love 24 hours a day? It is basically the dream. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the program if new opportunities arise, or at the very least, it opens opportunities with another school, which is the hope. So I'm not too worried about it for now. Yeah, what I can say, my top advice would come out of the main editing course for the program, which is what I got to teach. And absolutely love teaching, and we got to well, there's a whole side story there where I got to more or less help them publish their I got to help these students publish their first book by submitting their short stories, and then we edited them together in the same way you
Hmm.
would for an anthology, whether professionally as independent authors, or in school settings for academic journals, which I've worked with before too. So very fun experience. And in the midst of that, yeah, I tend to throw aside a lot of the the classic advice. I mean, yeah, I definitely we could start small with something fun like adverbs. Yeah, don't listen to either extreme. Don't use try to limit them, make them intentional. I would say this is how I've always had it put to me. A strong noun and a strong verb will always outperform excessive adjectives and adverbs, because usually people throw in adverbs and adjectives because the nouns and verbs weren't strong enough to begin with. So if
Hmm.
you learn to be more precise with your language, you can usually chop a lot of your adjectives and a lot of your adverbs. And it leads to much cleaner, readable prose too. So that's just an added bonus. Um, yeah, okay. What else can we get into? It's yeah, I mean, I'm on summer now anyway between teaching, so yeah. What would be some of the really fun advice? See, me, I pour over notes for hours before teaching a single course, so now you're really testing me. No curve, so much for no curveballs. What would be a really good what would Roy Peter Clark say? He's my go-to for a lot of writing advice. Writing Tools by Roy Peter Clark, one of the best. You want to talk about writing instruction? One of the best writing books you can read. I
Hmm.
would even put it above Elements of Style by Strunk and White, which is kind of another classic. Um, yeah, there we go. I've given you resources at the very least. That's already helpful.
That's great.
Yeah. What would be some good writing advice off the tips? Off the tip of my tongue.
What's it?
Um,
What's how about fantasy crafting advice
yeah, let's go more
for
specific. Yeah,
for
that
let's go
helps.
more specific. Instead of solving all the world's problems, let's just solve this one.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I'll say this for fantasy in particular, a lot of sci-fi authors struggle with this too. But when I was going through the writing program, I had friends who showed me they had hundreds of pages of world building notes, and yet they hadn't written a single draft page yet. They hadn't
Yeah.
written any of the actual story. And that's a trap a lot of us fall into. Excessive world building and never just starting. And when you start, you have to, I think a lot of writers, I've seen both extremes. Some writers, they say just put out garbage and edit later. No, 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 no. That works for some people. If that's you, great. but a lot of authors need to be told not to do that. You need to, but you do need to start. You need to accept that what comes on the page first is not the finished version, and you need to be willing to reiterate. It's not just a matter of being willing to throw out your darlings, which is huge for authors to learn. You have to learn to be a little less attached to what you write, um, but you have to be willing to reiterate. And once you are in that comfort zone of actually putting words on the page instead of just dreaming of the world, you have to actually start writing it down. Not just world building, not just creating a glossary and an outline, and you have to actually start putting words on the page. Um, and and you have to trim it down to the bare bones of what you hope to create. So you can add flowery prose later, but I think a lot of authors need to learn um, to write that skeleton story first. Get the meat. Get the well, yeah, get the skeleton, then add the meat, and then you can add kind of the decorations and the clothing and the accessories to make your story really shine. But start from the ground up. Um, yeah, with fantasy, just don't get lost in the uh, don't get lost in the Dungeons and Dragons and magic world. Magic cards. Like world building is such a trap for a lot of new authors, which I realize is a very
Yes.
long-winded way to say that, but yeah, start
Well,
start
yeah,
right
no,
there.
that's sort of interesting. I say that because uh, I've thought about it, mostly because what they tell you is that uh, to be a way of having publishing success is to have sequels and to
Mm.
have subsequent books. And I personally don't really think in that mode when I'm writing something. What I think about is I take a character and then I subject them to stress and see where they end up on the other side. This is just my way and my approach of doing something. So what I end up having is a character's complete sort of arc by the end of my book. And I don't really want to go back.
Fair. Okay.
I don't really want to go
Yeah.
back to that. Do you think that fantasy, I'll say, how would I say this? That particularly fantasy and fantasy novels would ever work for an author like me, where
Hmm.
my goal is just to tell a story about one character going on an almost non-episodic journey.
Oh,
And I try,
absolutely.
yeah. And think
I,
about that, I think about, for example, Willow is
mhm.
one of my favorite fantasy stories that
Yeah.
wasn't episodic, and then
Mhm.
they wrote Willow books, and they were episodic.
Yeah.
And then
Never
there was
touched
a Willow
those.
TV show, and then I was
And a
like,
TV
oh,
show. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, like, oh, so now Willow is episodic.
I
But
have no
yes,
notion of these books, and I gave this series, I think, one episode of a try, and
yes,
I just said, no way, don't destroy my childhood. I love that movie.
yes,
Uh, that's and Val Kilmer speaking. What a
yes,
giant of a man. So yeah, that was a great Val Kilmer movie as well.
yes,
Oh yeah, I love Willow, and that's a really good example. Movies kind of show that a lot. There are a lot of standalone fantasy movies, and
yeah.
there are a lot of really good standalone fantasy books. Um, so some of that could be just changing demand. There are always highs and lows. Sometimes the demand is for longer series, sometimes it's for standalones. I think we're kind of back in the
Mhm.
middle right now where no one wants a long series, especially from indie authors like myself, until you've really established yourself.
Yeah.
Um, but it can be hard. It can be hard to sell a standalone. That's true, especially in fantasy. That can be hard. Um, yeah, but can it be done? Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I mean, even writing a series, I tend to be, I don't like a series that bores me. So in my experience, the fantasy series that do well, they never stop building towards a definitive conclusion. So
Yeah.
I mean, Harry Potter as an example. From book one, you know at some point we're going to finally defeat Voldemort, and after that, the story's over. You know,
Mhm.
so you keep going for 7 books because you know that's coming somewhere somehow. Wheel of Time, you know the last battle is coming. You hear about it in book one, and you never stop hearing about it until they finally do it. So that can stretch out for 14 books, but there is an overarching arc. It's just, you can also do an overarching arc in a single book,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to have the end in mind, which is something I do. I make sure I have the end in mind when I talk about, potential books beyond this initial arc I'm doing. Uh, those will have their own endings, but the I know exactly how the next book ends. Right now, I'm
Yes.
filling the gap, but I know exactly where this goes, and it's hinted at so strongly throughout. Starting in Fall of Selvandria, even stronger in book two. That by the time you get to book three, even seeing the cover of that book, you're gonna know. Oh, I know exactly what's coming in this book. Now, it might not come
Hmm.
the way you expect, but it's coming, and I think that keeps readers going through a series, but even also in a standalone you can have that same anticipation. You build it up initially, and you put the character through their stresses, and you give them that arc, and you get them to where you wanted them to be, or maybe not. Maybe if you're pantsing it, you just, but the journey can absolutely be a single book.
Interesting. So let's get contentious for our last 15 minutes.
Brilliant.
How do you fix George R. R. Martin's situation
Oh.
with these final two books? I have an idea. Let me tell you my idea. Because I think George R. R. Martin was actually very important with getting me back into reading fiction because I'm
Mm,
a professional historian. So I've always been reading. It's not even like a thing where I know some people like count the books they've read this year. It's just this just I'm just always reading books. I'm reading books at my
mm,
job. There's nothing. There's no sort of moment where I'm not knowledge maxing or whatever it is.
fair, yeah.
And and I became quite enamored with the way he structured his chapters. And I like the idea of his perspectives and his characters, and particularly how they deal with duty. And so it got me very interested. Um, I haven't written any fantasy, but to a certain extent, it piqued my interest at a time where I had just been away from reading fiction for a very long time.
Mm.
And before that, I had the fiction tastes of a 50-year-old man. So, I was reading things like Catch 22 and stuff like my dad would buy me and dump in my lap. So I had the reading taste of a 50-year-old Jewish man. So, at, yeah, right.
That's good.
Is it any wonder why I have a podcast called Dad Lit? So I think a lot about how we can all help George fix his problems
Mm,
because he has many. I actually don't think the postmodern element that he deals with, or the sort of dismantling heroic journeys is a problem. I think he's going to find his way out of that. And he never fully did it in the first place. So all these people that think that, oh, well, George has gone grimdark. He's not gone grimdark. That's he's nowhere near there. What he's created are a series of protagonists that are presented with antagonists that are very horrible, and the protagonists are given choices of whether or not to, morally dissolve themselves, and what it costs to combat those antagonists, which I think is terrific. I just think it's good writing.
mm,
What I think he's actually gotten himself into is a situation where he cannot feasibly finish in a coherent way the the story in the last two books. It's just not going to happen. And my suggestion, and you let me know what you think of this, is that we get four books, East, West, North, and South, and they deal with and resolve to the moment where everyone comes together, everything that is going on in these different zones, as it were. Similar to kind of what he did with A Feast for Crows, which is a terrific book, and A Dance with Dragons.
Mhm.
And I was wondering what you would think about that. So basically, we'd have the South, which is all the stuff going on with the Prince of Dorne, and going on in King's Landing, and the rather messy naval battle that we have coming up. The North, which is the many and varied things that are going on up there, and then oh well, the naval battle would be on the west, which is the Iron Isles and all that stuff, and Sam Tarley, and then of course east, which is what's going on with Daenerys Targaryen.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way to get out of it. But you give me your thoughts on how, if you were George and you weren't spending your time writing New York Giants fan fiction, and complaining about your fans. What would you do to work your way out of this?
Oh, that's tough. I'm kind of indifferent at this point, to be honest. And part of that is especially having watched the show, skipping significant parts, but
Yeah.
but having watched it. No, you've watched the show, right? Or no?
Oh yeah, but of course the last three seasons of the show are absolute garbage.
Yeah.
They've
Um,
they've they ended up paying their actors too much, and then they didn't want to pay their actors for the whole story, which is a little silly. So
it's
I think
interesting
that's a big
because
mistake.
there were parts of yeah, it was right, 6, 7, and 8 were, yeah, right, because yeah,
Yeah,
so 6, there were parts of 6 that I did kind of like, where but you could tell right away they were drifting away from the book, because or from the books, because they were getting beyond them,
yeah,
and they were starting to resolve things much more frequently and much sooner than you probably would have expected from the
yeah,
story we had seen thus far. So it was
yes,
too much resolution coming too quickly. But some of those resolutions felt pretty darn good. It's just,
yeah,
again, they were too soon. So I didn't actually hate that season. I just didn't think it was the best decision making.
yeah,
Then there were parts of 7 and 8 that absolutely just full on hated, both in terms of timing and result. So that
yeah.
was a bit different. I think part of me, you know,
It just sort of died on the withered on the vine for you, is what I'm hearing.
no, it really, I think I'll be honest, I still had hope until the very last stupid episode. I think, like, after, so if we go to the battle, the main, which was that the end of season 7, or was it in season 8 that we finally saw the Witch King killed? That was in, or sorry, not, not
That's a penultimate episode.
the
The
second
one that
last,
was,
yeah.
yeah, the one that was so dark that no one could actually see the
Yeah.
battle
So
going
so
on.
so some lighting decisions were bad,
Yes,
and some storytelling elements not my favorite, but some was
yes,
good. Overall, that had more of the vibe I would have hoped for. And then where things went from there, uh now again, this is why I'm indifferent, is because I just really don't know how much was what he had planned,
yeah,
and how much was what the show did. And because we'll never know, because he could change it now,
yeah,
it's very hard for me to say what the best, like, I am a sucker for a conclusion. I
yeah,
really, but I get that I get why that wouldn't be feasible for him. But I'll say this. This is why you I will never, this is why I don't even think I'll touch whatever books come next, is, like, again, I don't know whether this was him or them,
yeah.
but I was so incredible, and I love Bran's character, I really do. But making him king made me so angry. Like, and you're a historian, so I feel like you can appreciate this. And
Yes.
having done my bachelor's degree in history, and I almost did my master's in history instead of policy, which is a whole other story too. But funny enough, it got me on the road to where I am now. So I
Yeah.
love that I made that decision. I never the economics side got me into
Yeah.
marketing, which got me into writing, and that's
Yeah.
kind of my journey, very briefly condensed, to how I got to where I am now through policy.
Yes, it does not make sense to have a person who is incapable of producing a child become a
Mhm.
monarch regardless of their supreme all-knowing power.
But it's also, well, that though to me is actually it's not just the all-knowing. The actual line in the show was something along the lines of, "You're our storyteller. You are the preserver of our
Yeah.
stories, and that's why we're gonna make you king." Okay, how, as an author and a historian in your case,
Yes.
how narcissistic is that,
Uh,
to make the storyteller the king by no
yeah.
other virtue than being a story? Are you nuts? I was so upset. I thought that was the most, like, I call that narcissistic storytelling. That's just reflecting
Yes.
yourself onto the page. I was so angry that that was my breaking point. Nothing
Yes.
else. And I didn't like Daenerys's turn bad, even though there were hints. But
Yeah.
it was so lame to me that, what, just how that, how quickly she transitioned from actually being pretty awesome from almost all the way through to,
Yeah.
oh, this, just no. I hated how quick she turned bad and just on a whim destroys the city with a dragon. That's not the Daenerys we knew up to that point. It is a
Yeah.
little darker in the books, but the show did not sufficiently. Anyways, no, just
Yeah, it just doesn't set it up well. Yeah.
those weren't my two. Those were my
Yes.
two breaking points. Daenerys, but then by far, to me, just the history and author side could not reconcile with making Bran king by no other virtue than him being a storyteller. Are you
Yes.
kidding me?
So this is the next question. As an epic fantasy author with, you know, five to who knows how many books against this great dark force, would you take the Germ out and declare no one shall finish the Draymir Chronicles? Or would
Hmm.
you appoint a successor to
I'd
finish
be
the
fine with that.
Chronicles?
Yeah, I like if I was
Yeah,
in
so you're a
that
normal
situation.
person. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah. Well, frankly, we've seen it done well enough times now.
Yes.
I can think of two easy examples right off the top of my head. And you will see changes. So an extreme example where there were big storytelling changes, but it worked. Michael Crichton, The Andromeda Strain. I really loved that book. And
Yep.
then I forget the author's name, but another author wrote a sequel to it with permission and with notes, but expanding on it, expanding on the initial notes Michael Crichton had for it, and wrote the Andromeda Evolution. And I love that. It's a really good sci-fi thriller, just absolutely fantastic. Very different tone, very different writing style,
Yeah.
but a perfect sequel. So it is absolutely doable. And then the other big example that comes to mind, ironically, I'm not a big Brandon Sanderson fan.
Hmm.
Any book of his I've tried to pick up, I just haven't really been able to get into. I can't explain it. It's just not my cup of tea. But his three editions, he picked up the Wheel of Time and finished it with three books, and those books are masterpieces. Not just for, like, on their own, they're masterful. I loved them,
Yes.
but how skillfully he picked up from where the other 11 books left off, and kept to the characters, kept to the lore. The only transition you felt between the books was in terms of just slight hints of writing style differences, and in some ways Brandon Sanderson improved upon Robert Jordan's writing.
Hmm.
So I was just blown away. That, to me, that is so far beyond where my writing capabilities are at right now, but I would aspire to it, to have that level of skill. Like
Yeah, no
again, I don't
awareness.
really like his books, but his own books so far that I've tried. But I will bow to that man's writing ability till the day I
Hmm.
die because of what he did with those three books.
Well, let's we could leave it at that. Brandon Sanderson, Savor of the Wheel of Time,
Yeah,
bringing it
absolutely.
home, landing the plane after practicing on Microsoft Flight Simulator, and bringing it in. Neat. I've never read Sanderson, but my friends tell me that I should give him a shot. So
Have you read The Wheel of Time?
no, I haven't read The Wheel of
Ah,
Time.
fair. Yeah.
Yes. So give me your plugs. What are we getting from Tim McKay?
Plugs as in where to find me
Yeah,
or
where do we find you? What are you doing in terms of your YouTube show and your books?
Sure. Yeah, I can give all the plugs really quick. So, in terms of the book, the sequel is well underway, but I can't really give a release date yet. But it is very close to being done. So I'm hopeful, very hopeful for the fall that that will come out. For now, you can get the Fall of Selvandria in hardcover, paperback, or ebook on Amazon.
I
Uh,
have one. It's beautiful.
yeah, and I'm so happy with that cover and how it turned out. It's yeah, very beautiful book, including the internal illustrations and the audio book. There's a story here, but in one way or another, I anticipate it will be. I'll say this: it will be uploaded in one form or another to ACX, essentially Amazon, by the end of May. So I hope that it will be approved and published probably June. So the
Okay,
audiobook is
great.
coming. And then in turn, yeah. So otherwise, where to find me? You can find me on X primarily. So Twitter, X, Tim McKay 52. Yeah, I'm sure links will be around. You find me on Blue Sky and Instagram and LinkedIn and everywhere else too. But my main home for book stuff is Twitter for sure. And then yeah, at the same time, Isaac Anderson and I have started All Caps Book Chat, where we more or less kind of do this, but with live chat. So you can chat, you can follow along on X or on YouTube, and join us, you know, to chat about books, to chat with whatever author or reviewer we have on for that day. So yeah, look it up on YouTube. That's the easiest place to follow us. So All Caps Book Chat. And yeah, I think those are the main things I have going on right now. I've got my book available right now, my audiobook coming soon, sequel coming eventually, and All Caps Book Chat.
This is literally the busiest man I've ever seen.
That's not even mentioning the editing work I do. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's tip of the iceberg. We haven't talked busy yet.
Well, thank you again, Tim, and check Tim's stuff out. This has been the Dad Led Pod.
Thanks for having me.